Well, but you are aware that since way before 1945, the Viet Minh was connected with the Communist Party, and that Ho Chi Minh went on to slaughter a considerable number of people in order to attempt to establish his orthodoxy in the North, and that it resulted in very nearly 1 million people fleeing to this non-entity in the South. Aren't you sympathetic with people who resist Ho Chi Minh? You would surely resist him, wouldn't you?
I would not have resisted Ho Chi Minh at that time. No.
Well, that's like
I would have
saying
resisted him if I would have been one of the 1
you,
million that were being oppressed by him.
It's like saying that you wouldn't have resisted Hitler in 1933 because there was a communist menace.
No,
it
is not saying that.
Why isn't it?
Because there's no parallel between Hitler and Ho Chi Minh.
Well, I think there's a considerable parallel because some people try to excuse their defense of Hitler on the grounds that there was a crisis in Germany, and you're trying to excuse Ho Chi Minh, who is a very... no, but you are trying to excuse Ho Chi Minh, who is a considerable butcher on a very large scale, on the grounds that something that Indochina had something worse to fear than Ho Chi Minh. Aren't you saying that?
Well, as far as Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese people were concerned, it had something considerably worse to fear.
I'm talking about you.
Yes, I think it had. It had French colonialism.
Which was worse than Ho Chi Minh.
Undoubtedly, it might have been if it had continued much longer because of the entirety of the 9-year war that followed it.
I'm talking about whether it was. Or do you, by the way, let's get this straight, do you dispute the statistics about the extent of the butchery of Ho Chi Minh? Or are you saying that he didn't, in fact, kill the 50 or 60,000 people in North Vietnam, which even he subsequently apologized?
Definitely killed.
He did kill them?
Definitely, yes.
And did the French kill 50 or 60,000 people? I'm not talking about wars. Everybody kills everybody in wars, but I mean during peacetime?
Well, we're talking about a war that was going on from 1946 to 1954, in which the 50,000 people were indeed killed, right?
No, I'm not.
You're talking about the period after 1954?
Yes, yeah.
Well,
I'm talking about the great carnages post-1954 that caused this great refugee traffic to come south.
Well, that was not the only reason for the refugee traffic to come south.
What was the other reason?
The fact that there were 900,000 of those people going south were Catholics who felt that they could live better under the regime in the south because of Ngo Dinh Diem being a Catholic.
Well, there are an awful lot of people
and I believe Ho Chi Minh is not a Catholic.
Well, but there are an awful lot of people who are Catholics who don't leave a country simply because it's not governed by... There are 6 million Catholics in England. I'm not aware that any of them have left, even though it's a church-state situation there.
Well, do you feel that the Queen is as oppressive as Ho?
No, that's just it. And I'm quite sure. Well, it seems to me, Mr. Vaughan, that for you to say that the refugees were in part drawn to South Vietnam because Diem was a Catholic, it's a little bit like saying that the Jews who left Germany during the 30s to come to New York did so because LaGuardia had Jewish blood and Hitler didn't. In other words, I consider it invasion. But let me ask you this, because I think this is central.
Your historical analogies are incredible.
I would expect you to resist history. Yeah, I agree with him.
Well, then you want to prosecute the war further, and we can get a colonialism of the Chase Manhattan Bank.
I think that ideally people ought to fight their own wars. I think it's absolutely ideal. Now, what are you going to do when they don't fight their own wars? You either decide, as a point of pride, you're going to refuse to help them, or you're going to say, yes, we acknowledge certain transcendent considerations. For instance, you know what I think? I think the French should have, well, I'll tell you, I think the French should have fought their own war against Hitler, and I think the Italians should have fought their own war against Mussolini. And I would listen with considerable respect to any president of the United States or presidential candidate who say, if the damn French, with all of their manpower and all of their resources, can't look after themselves sufficiently to cope with Adolf Hitler, well, damn it, we're not going to send American people over there. As a matter of fact, all the presidents did say that, didn't they?
Yes. However, you're once again drawing a parallel that has no application to Vietnam whatsoever.
Why do you hate parallels?
Because there is no historical parallel with Vietnam anywhere.
Well, suppose I attempt to construct one.
Please do.
A historical parallel would be that there was an aggressive power, that's Hitler, to be compared with an aggressive power, that's Ho Chi Minh, that force A in both instances invades country B, and the good guys yell for help. Like de Gaulle, he yelled for help, though there was a Vichy government which would presumably correspond to those sympathizers with the North, with whom you, for some reason, feel an identification. And the question is, were we right in going to France? I should think a hell of a lot righter in South Vietnam, where there hasn't even been a de facto North Vietnamese government than in France.
I smell the Munich analogy somewhere in the background, and I will resist it with all my energy.
Well, go ahead. Is it
There
sufficient?
were two countries involved in the aggression that you referred to, Germany and another country. Is that not correct? A territorial boundary was crossed. Is that not correct? No territorial boundary was crossed in Vietnam.
It's also correct they had white skins.
Yes.
If you want to stress the differences, it's also correct that it happened 25 years ago.
Yes.
That's another difference.
Well, you cited this as a
I'm
parallel.
talking about
I'm saying there is
significant
no
differences.
parallel
I'm
there.
talking about significant differences.
Well, you just said this was a significant parallel.
Yes,
it is
it
not
is.
significant at all. It
Well,
is
give
one
me
country.
significant differences then, not insignificant.
I did not say there was not significant differences. I said there is no parallel with Vietnam in history.
The fact that they crossed a Dutch border, whereas the 17th parallel.
It's not a border.
All right. Why? Because it hasn't been sanctified by sufficient usage as a border?
No.
Well, in that case, nobody has any right defending Israel because its borders are hardly sanctified by history. They're completely arbitrary.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry I must interrupt for a moment or two.
You say we were in Israel, Mr. Vaughan. Did you want to drop that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. All right, we'll drop that.
By a democratic process called voting, the very process that we suppressed in Vietnam because it was apparent that we were not going to win.
How did we suppress that and when? And
By
against
installing
whom?
Go Dinh Diem as our puppet in 1954.
Now, why do you say our puppet?
Our puppet, that's right.
You know what surprises me about
What?
the use of your, but you love to use that word. You
Yes,
the whole breed,
it's a cute word.
Is that simultaneously you call him our puppet,
Yes.
and you get sore as hell because he doesn't do what we told him to do. You see, I've never quite understood that. Everybody says he's our puppet, but they also say in that damn puppet, he simply isn't doing what we want him to do. Which of the two is the correct version? That he was recalcitrant or that he was a puppet?
That he did not do what we wanted him to do because we told him not do that. Therefore, he was our puppet.
We told him we wanted him to do something and then told him we didn't want him to do what we told him we wanted him to
I
do?
am certain that in the clandestine halls of Ossining in New York, where these discussions first took place between Cardinal Spellman and various other people, that it was the main intention of installing Go Dinh Diem there to not hold the elections. Therefore, he was our puppet because he did not hold them. I'm sure under our indication, advice, and counsel.
Who told you this?
Who told me
Yeah,
this?
'cause
I would say
Why
that-
didn't he tell me? Whoever told you this? So I could have considered that.
Well, the reading that I have done told me this.
The reading told you that, let me rehearse. Cardinal Spellman went to Ossining.
Yes, Maryknoll Seminary.
And met with somebody and instructed
The somebody
them
was Go Dinh Diem.
to instruct John F. Kennedy, to instruct
No, John F.
somebody,
Kennedy was not at Ossining.
to instruct somebody not to have elections because we hate free elections, or because we think that in any free election, the refugees who had just finished fleeing from North Vietnam presumably fled to South Vietnam because they wanted to influence the elections to vote for a government like the government they had just finished fleeing from?
Well, that was an extremely long question. John Kennedy,
Is
it's
anybody...
quite apparent to the world that communism has failed as a system, economically.
Oh, it's not apparent to the world at all.
Oh,
It's
I
apparent
think
to
so.
me and to you, but it's not apparent to the world.
Well, that's really the whole
There are
world.
an awful lot of people who are very enthusiastic. Incidentally, it's very interesting that you keep talking about these old Marxists here. Bettina Apteker isn't all that old.
No.
And there are actually more members of the Communist Party now than there were 5 or 10 years ago. So I think it's rather optimistic to suppose that people concert in believing that communism has failed.
Is that a question?
Yes. Rhetorical.
Rhetorical, I thought it was. Smacks did that somehow. Yes, I think it is difficult to say that Bettina Apteker should be representative of America in relation to fearing or loving communism.
That's all?
That's it.
Would you, under what circumstances would you favor United States assistance to resist communist aggression which took the form of infiltration rather than the crossing of a border?
When there is a distinct threat to our national security.
Was he in Korea?
Was there? No. It was the United Nations effort, not the United States effort.
Oh, come on. 99.9% United States.
Yes,
Sure.
under the banner of the United Nations.
Yeah, because...
We control the United Nations, obviously, it was
no,
us.
in the first place, the relevant communist was out having lunch or something when we got the vote through, otherwise he would
That's
have vetoed
correct.
it. Yeah.
Right.
Now, if he had vetoed it, would you then have been against our going to the aid of South Korea?
I think that we probably would have, and I probably would have voted against it.
You would have voted against it.
Yes.
In other words, you were really against our going to the help of South Korea.
Without international sanctions,
Okay.
yes.
Suppose there were international sanctions in favor of helping Thailand. Would you then be in favor of it?
Yes.
So what matters to you is whether we can get Upper Chad and Lower Volta, or whatever it is, to make a majority, right? That's what matters.
What matters to
The
me...
numerical majority in the United Nations constitutes the morality of any given situation.
May I ask Mr. Vaughan to clarify his point a moment?
Yeah.
Did you say that you would favor United States assistance whenever the United Nations voted to oppose?
Yes, he did.
I know, I said international sanctions.
Yeah.
Those are treaties of
Yeah.
pacts that we may have, where our constitutional processes take it to the government of the United States and then it's taken to the United Nations. Not abrupt unilateral intervention as in the Dominican Republic.
I know. And in other words, he is reaffirming his position that if the UN says okay, it's okay.
Yes.
And that's your definition of morality.
I am interested in the rule of world law, not
But
the
there is no
rule
rule.
of the jungle.
Who
And
says
the rule of the jungle is the unilateral intervention by the United States in areas where they have no sanction by their allies or the dissonance in the United Nations.
And you consider that world law consists of whatever arithmetical tabulation you have at any given moment in the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Yes, arithmetical tabulation in relation to the process of voting is called democracy, and that's why I agree with it.
Yes, but we have never subscribed to a, quote, democracy that assigns equal rights to many states, to the Azores, for instance, or whatever, and to the United States.
That's what the United Nations
This is a
assigns.
Vaughan contribution to international thought.
Well,
Is this what you write?
Yes, it is, and I'm delighted that it occurred on this show.
Well,